So now we've come to the time of the panel discussion. Here. I see that Daniel wants to jump in, and I'm going to allow him to jump in. But after you've made your comment, I'm going to open the floor to questions because time is just running, and I'm sure I can hear that the audience is really engaging. So we need to give the audience an opportunity to pose questions. But Daniel, do jump in.
No, I enjoyed your point, and I agree absolutely. And one of my pet frustrations when I travel across Africa, and the visa story I like, but I go to, where do I go? Maputo, and I go to the airport, and they tell me, oh, it's a relatively new airport. It was built by the Chinese. Then I go to, where was I? Walvis Bay. Oh, we've got a new road. Takes us up to the big dune, Dune 7, built by the Chinese. Then I went to Nairobi. Big highway, nice new highway, beautiful highway from the airport into Nairobi, Chinese. And that really frustrates me in a sense, because we should really be complementing each other. In a sense, it's the same point that you're making. But when you look at some of these big infrastructure spends that are so critical to our advancement into the future, and there's nothing wrong with them, but why aren't they built by us? Why aren't they? And there seems to me be a lack of facilitation or incentivization within the broader African Union framework, or perhaps within one of the other intracontinental agencies, that would facilitate and would offer incentives for domestic African spend on these big ticket projects. Otherwise, fundamentally, yes, these countries get good world-class facilities, but really from a continental inward perspective, we're just losing the value of those contracts, and we're not giving our people the jobs and works. And it really frustrates me every time I go. So I'm happy to see all of this investment, although there's a political kickback, of course. If country A finances this, there's a political kickback. One has to be honest about that. And the expectation of the political kickback can come in various ways. And that's also a reason why we have to be quite careful as a continent to look more inwardly at what we can deliver ourselves than what outsiders are delivering for us.
Yeah, which basically speaks to collaboration. I think you were speaking about that before, Andrew, about collaboration. Oh, no, your hand is up as well. Okay, go on.
If I could, and speaking about self-belief, because I think that actually is the key, ultimately. Speaking about, space resources or space mining, very interesting story about the NASA Perseverance mission that went to Mars in 2021. And this was supposed to take a geological sample of a Mars rock and bring it back then to Earth. So what occurs is that this rover goes into the rock, the engineers grab the sample, closed it up, but when they looked inside, there was absolutely nothing. So for hours there was the speculation saying, well, the aliens don't want us to know that, we're taking parts from their home. And it came out of South Africa to say that, no, that part of rock that you chose isn't geologically capable of being solid. So as soon as it was touched, that sample crumbled. So when we talk about trust and expertise in ourselves, South Africa geologically would know that, because we have extremely high skill and expertise when it comes to mining. So how do these stories get out? How do we look at the fact that NASA JPL's Dr. Yapi van Zyl, may his soul rest in peace, was for 30 years the leader of deep space exploration at NASA. He comes from Namibia, educated in Stellenbosch. So when we talk about that self-pride, it is knowing that any kid, one of the second theses that were done on quantum physics, particularly theoretical physics. This gentleman comes from Guatemala Township. There's astrophysicists that are studying right now from the East. I do have to state I have a little bit of a bias. I am from the East myself. So maybe there's something in the water. But once these stories start coming out, this is where we develop jobs. This is where we develop growth. This is where we look at economies and say, what are we really, really good at? Those strengths, develop pride in that, and we'll be able then to, really push our economy forward.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to open the floor to some questions. You kind of get a sense of what the panelists' respective strengths are. You can just, by a show of hands, Lady at the back there, put your mic on and do your thing. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. All protocols observed. Kalalelo from BBUD, also from the East Rand. And my question is to you, Thongwane, regarding propriety control. The systems that you're talking about is fundamental to us in the built environments. Does this system in any way help to solve our GIS issues? Namely, being able to survey things in the rural areas, places where, municipalities don't have developed programs and skills or data, in fact, because we've lost a lot of our data in South Africa. You would walk in trying to find a road and trying to find where the municipal services come from, but we cannot get that because the maps are lost. There haven't been digital processes or development. Can we get assistance in the built environments? And then can we also integrate that with AI according to industry trends?
Thank you very much for that question. The answer is yes, and I'm going to give you the answer in a two-pronged type of way. In terms of geographical information systems, I mean, this is absolutely critical. The technology's been around for 20 plus years. I think RadarSat, which is coming out of Canada, has been providing synthetic aperture radar, and probably the most commercially well-known data provider of satellite imagery is the formerly Google's Planet. The real difference comes in with data analysis and application in terms of the data. Firstly, how it's gathered. So the reason why it's so important to have larger satellites, we're talking about under a ton, which is what FleetSAR will provide. In total, the constellation is about 12 tons, has to do with something called swath. So swath is your capability of how much can you actually scan of the Earth at a particular time. So in terms of the maritime domain, we're looking at about 700 kilometers per scan as it goes in orbit. And that takes about 90 odd minutes. And if we do push it further, it could actually do revisits of about 4 times in a day. That's about 8 odd hours. On a terrestrial environment, you're looking at about 350 kilometers. So in that built environment, whether it's urban landscape or it is more rural municipal requirements, the upstream capability with the system is to be able to then scan and place from a data analysis perspective the type of what we'll call assets, right? That are there, that are available, and be able to then utilize that data to then put it into statistics SA and then disseminate that obviously into all 3 regions of government. Around utilizing AI, there's a challenge currently that is being run by the South African National Space Agency called the Earth Observation Challenge. And one of the really exciting projects that I saw coming out of that was the mapping of informal settlements as well as rural areas. So you wanted to provide digital services for government to citizens. However, someone doesn't have a postal address, or you want to do planning, town planning. However, you haven't mapped as you said when it comes to the particular roads or the plots or the mapping, all of that. So the use was of satellite data imagery to then start gridding in informal settlements, to start gridding in rural areas, take that information, utilize computer vision and machine learning systems to then build a repository where you could then assign what you would call almost a digital twin, which would then be an address for someone. So finally, someone who is an informal settlement would be able to then have an address. You have an address means that there's capability around delivery of goods and services. So we can definitely continue the conversation around that particular business case, but this system is definitely built for the built environment and to help drive policy and decision making within the governmental environment in all three tiers: national, regional, as well as provincial.
Thanks for that, Thongwane. Two gentlemen here. The gentleman on the left, yes, you, and then you thereafter.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for this opportunity for young people like us to come here and grasp this high level knowledge on what's happening with our continent. My name is Utepi Mfulwane. I'm not from the East Rand. I'm from a small town called Rustenburg from the Northwest. Hello, my people. And I'm with Mastec. My first question will be speaking to African unity, and maybe Mr. Andrew and Mr. Daniel can assist on this one. There's been a narrative that speaks to the unity of Africa and the narrative that speaks to one currency in Africa. From a surface level, what I understand is that to take a neighborhood and make it a suburb, every household must fix their yards. So I want to know that for this to happen, do we then say each state in the African continent gets their kitchen in order and we use each other as investments to say Kenya can support us where we lack, and then we can develop South Africa, then vice versa, we go to Zimbabwe, do that. Then once we have been established, then we come together and form this unity. My second question, maybe Mr. President, it's an honor to be in the same room, breathing the same air with you. My second question speaks to leadership, that we've established that, President, policies are not the problem. And the problem might be in the implementers and the executors of that policy. How do we then look at the benchmark of the people who we entrust and place our confidence in governing us in our states without compromising the privilege of democracy? Thank you very much.
Please pose your question as well.
Good morning, and I'm not from Rustenburg or the East Rand. But my question almost mirrors his. It's both to Andrew and the President. I think Andrew alluded to the fact that what stifles development is that we're planning in silos. And maybe we can put that down to a trust deficit between the different role players. Because some of the language is that the state is inept and an impediment to innovation. On the other side, we speak to business as being extractionists, and you see that in how much money in reserves business holds presently. So the question then would be, how do we rehabilitate the relationship as a means of fostering growth, and how does business work to capacitate the state? Yeah.
I'm going to ask President to pick up on the questions that were posed and any comments that you may have.
No, thank you very much for the question. I'm not from Rustenburg. I'm not from the East. Firstly, we speak of the South African state, and we speak of the government, and we speak of public service, and So the state in any country is a permanent entity, whereas governments come and go each time you go to elections. There's a possibility that you'll end up with a different government. So the two are separate and have to be at the conceptual level understood as separate entities. And that government serves as the face of the state for a term at a time. Now, how much state gains capability and institutional memory is a function of this understanding that it's a permanent entity. Whereas a government, as I said, only serves as the face of the state for a term at a time. Now, the interface, so if you have in your state professional public service, professionalized, capable people, the interface between these professional bureaucracy, if you like, and the political principles has to be managed in a manner which does not impose the decisions of the political principles, even if they are wrong, on the bureaucracy, professional bureaucracy. So typically, a minister finds a director general. In other countries, they are called permanent secretaries. A director general who was appointed by the previous administration. Now, that position is supposed to be permanent. But the new minister comes in without assessing the skills mix, wants to appoint a senior manager, which then means you have a high turnover at senior management level in your state. And therefore that state is unstable and is being actively destabilized by a new minister who wants to appoint a director general of his or her own choice. You see, so that's what hampers gaining of institutional memory and the creation of a capable state. Because if a state is forever on a steep learning curve, it cannot be capable, as it were. So that's the nub of our problem at the political level and the conceptual level, that half the time, even at local government level, the councillors think that they know better than the engineers who are employed in the council. So pipe is best, and they are there fielding questions, interviews by journalists, pretending to know how they're going to solve the problem. And that's not their responsibility, that's not their expertise. So yeah, let me leave it on that note. Yeah. Thanks. I hope it makes sense here.
Yeah, President McClintock, I want to say it's really nice of you to have stayed behind, because usually people of your stature, when they're called to speak, they do their thing and they leave. And it's so nice that you've been willing to listen. However, that does not mean that if you have to leave now, I'm preventing you. But I'm just saying it's a really nice touch.
I know if, in diplomatic language, you mean I've overstayed my welcome.
So, Andrew and Daniel, there's something that came from the two young gentlemen that you can pick up on, but perhaps I'll start with you, Andrew, to say, do all African countries need to sharpen their pencils first before they join forces? I think that was basically one of the questions.
Yes. I think There's probably two answers to that. But the first part of it, let me assure the young gentleman, it's already happening. When we are talking about what we need to do, we're not saying it's not happening. It's already happening. And I say this because if you look at trade across the continent, even with the little measures I talked about earlier with visas, you're really seeing African countries coming very fast to the realization that we have to up our game. And it is really happening. I'll give, again, examples that I am aware of. If I look at the central bank in Kenya, again, private sector-led initiatives, we have licensed EcoBank from West Africa. We have licensed Access Bank from Nigeria. Zenith Bank will soon be entering our environment. Stanbic Bank, which is Standard Bank of South Africa, are very much present. They are a tier 1 bank in Kenya. Now, in 2006, cast our minds back, we had very interesting regulations in Kenya. And one of them was a real stifler to investment. Any bank licensed in Kenya had to have 30% local ownership. What did that mean? It's akin to being in a forced marriage. You end up saying, to invest in Kenya, I must then shop for somebody suitable to be my local partner. What happened inevitably? People would shop for a politically connected local partner to be your free carry investor locally. And it's a horrible feeling to have to invest in a country and feel I need patronage and coverage to survive. Now, in 2006, when we removed that regulation, the two biggest banks in Kenya were Barclays and Standard Chartered. And one of the fears in the local market was that if you let the foreigners in, they'll come and overrun our institutions. Fast forward to 2025, the top 5 banks in Kenya are Kenyan-owned banks today. And by a mile. By the time you reach Standard and now what is ABSA, because ABSA bought out Barclays, they're in position 5 and 6 in size. So why do we share this message? We have no reason to fear being united and opening ourselves up as a continent for business. Because I would rather have 10% of the 1.3 billion people in Africa than 100% of the 40 million people in Kenya. Do the math. It speaks for itself. So we are opening ourselves up already for business. Are we where we want to be yet? No. But this journey is one journey where I'll happily tell anybody who cares to listen, Africa is open for business. Don't get left behind. If you miss the bus and you actually live in Africa, will you blame the Chinese who have rolled in with their turbocharged capital and are looking for opportunities in PPPs? Daniel, you gave the example of the expressway. Public-private partnerships are open for business. Why? Because we are increasingly finding on the continent that the government can't deliver everything. Let's accept that right now. Number 2, the most efficient delivery channel is the private sector. And finally, the expression government has no business being in business is very true. The one infrastructure project that has been delivered in Kenya on time, on budget, is our expressway, without a single shilling being spent by the government. It was opened as a public-private partnership project. The Chinese were told, you want to bid for this, you can do it, but you do it with your money and at your commercial risk. They have a 30-year concession on the expressway, but the expressway is already opening up the Kenyan economy. If you land at Jomo Kenyatta Airport, instead of taking 2 hours to get into the central business district, you take 15 minutes. What does that do for Nairobi in a very subtle, intangible way? It makes it a very strong investment destination. And when I drive on that expressway and I pay the equivalent of $2 to get to the airport, my time of 2 hours is worth more than the $2. So who's winning? It's Kenya. So again, when I talk about this from the context of the African platform of a unified Africa, we're starting with the regional blocks, we're starting with Africa continental free trade areas. And our president the other day asked a very interesting question when he was challenging us, Pan-African payment and settlement system. Why should a South African paying a business in Kenya have to send money through SWIFT? It goes to some European capital, converts into dollars and bounces back into Nairobi after 3 days. Who's enjoying that money for those 3 days? Not Johannesburg, not Nairobi. The fee is paid to SWIFT. Tell me the African shareholder in SWIFT. None. So why can't we have a unified Pan-African payment system where President Motlanthe and President Ruto, President Museveni all agree, unify our payment system. If I'm to settle in South Africa, I pay you in rand. If I'm to settle in Nairobi, I pay you in shillings. Today, you all look for a conversion into dollars and then think about your exchange rate, and the person who receives it thinks about the exchange rate back into shillings. Who's colonized who? Yet the conversation between the two of us has nothing to do with the US dollar. So if you break down those barriers and smoothen our own landscape here, let's play the match on our field. We were laughing earlier and saying, you know, in the US, there's something called the World Series in baseball. It's called the World Series, but it's in the US. That tells you that somebody there thinks the world starts and ends on the North American continent. And here we are in Africa, and I'm very happy to see the young men here because this is the future. Please believe in yourselves. And our old mentality, which stemmed from our history, we've got to break it, smash it all down, and say, guys, we can do some of these things for ourselves, by ourselves, on our own continent. It's happening already.
Thank you for hitting those high notes. Go for it, Daniel.
Well, I equally am happy to see young entrepreneurs in this audience, and that's the critical issue for me. In fact, in the South African sense, from an entrepreneurial point of view, South Africans on an African scale of how entrepreneurial are we are not as entrepreneurial. And there are surveys to show that. Now, that could be because of history, could be because of a sense of entitlement very often, could be a sense of the regulatory and political environment in which we operate. So we ourselves, just from a domestic point of view, need to compete with the Kenyans. Well, I think on the survey results actually are a lot more entrepreneurial, if you can believe some of these comparative surveys. But getting back to your question about unity, which I think is a very important issue and a very difficult issue. There are 54 jurisdictions in Africa, each with a myriad of complexities, whether it's language, whether it's religion, whether it's ethnic groups, whether it's colonial history, whether it's colonial borders and boundaries, you name it. There couldn't be more obstacles, actually, to a continent of unity than we have on this very continent. And with 54 jurisdictions, increasingly looking as though they are breaking away from what should be a greater African unity perspective. And you've seen the military regimes, particularly in the Sahel region, the Central African war issues, even insurgencies in the north of Mozambique, which creates instability in Mozambique as well, a country that really has got tremendous promise in terms of natural gases. But these issues hold, so many parts of Africa back. We have to be realistic about just how unified is Africa going to be. So perhaps on the big picture issues, you can't expect too much, to put it that way. But what you can do is you can look at sector by sector interests, sector by sector. And whether it's financial services, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's space exploration, whether it's the Continental Free Trade Agreement across border, the reduction of tariffs, which is so critical for us as a continent in an era where tariffs are going in the opposite direction, particularly from a North American perspective. We absolutely have an opportunity. So I would prefer to look, although I'm a political guy, and I would like to see big picture unity issues, and I'd like to see everybody hugging and shaking hands and looking friendlier with each other. It's a reality. It ain't going to happen, at least for the moment, in my view. It's a sector by sector approach that I think we need to take when it comes to African unity, and seeing what kind of sector by sector agreements can be reached between country A and country B and private sector company, and of course the national entities as well. And that's the way I'd like to go. From a youth perspective, you've got to be an activist for all of this. You know, it's not just your job. Put it that way. You're not just in a 9-to-5 job anymore as a young African on this continent. You are a mobilizer for a better regulatory environment, a better political environment, and of course an environment that fosters innovation, a better R&D environment, a better educational environment. And we haven't even discussed aspects of training and education that are so critical to the issue of young people on this continent. And that's pressure on the government and to some degree on the private sector that need to get more involved also with education and training. And it's a responsibility. I'm a little bit older than you, but hey, I mean, I try to be an activist on these issues as well. That's what you got to be. You got to be a revolutionary. You don't have to wear red, by the way, if I say the word revolutionary. However, if you like a red tie, go for it.
So when I saw that we had an hour and a half for this panel discussion, I thought, "Ooh, that's an awful lot of time." But actually, it isn't. So I'm just going to ask for just 3 hands, which I see up already. Whoa, that fourth one, I don't want to look at. Okay, so I'm just going to get your questions very quickly, and then we'll get some very succinct answers, please, because, you know, we need to be fed. So yes, you first, sir.
Thank you. My name is Simon White. I'm the principal of Charcoal Entrepreneurship and Leadership School. I attended the conference about last month ago, and the conference was on education and entrepreneurship. And Mr. Daniel, I totally agree with you. South Africans, we are not as entrepreneurial as we think we are. That's one thing. We were more, but we've lost that edge. Just point of reference. So one of the highlights of the conference was that the government is looking to introduce entrepreneurship in the next 4 years. They're currently engaging in the policy process and everything else. And I expressed my disappointment because in 4 years' time, whatever policy regulations we bring to the fore will be totally outdated by and large. And because we've got to create the educators of entrepreneurship to be in place, and it will fall by the wayside. So there's one issue. The second issue I'd like to raise is the fact that there's a general assumption that education would naturally solve the ideas or the solutions or present solutions of entrepreneurship. And I'm saying it doesn't, it's not the case, because what needs to happen, we need to be more deliberate in our approach of creating innovators and entrepreneurs. It will not help or happen by default. What we've done in our school, we introduced entrepreneurship and innovation as additional formal school subjects. And we've seen the dividends and the results and the benefits thereof. Right? There's a lot of things I can talk about, but one of the things that we've seen is that our learners generally and naturally adopt and have an entrepreneurial mindset. They are solution-driven. They think solution-wise. But in addition to that, that's just one last mention. Because of the mindset we've adopted, we have invented a number of exciting solutions to the point of providing a solution which you don't expect from school, which is basically in the education insurance market. We just patented a product and a solution that will solve a lot of problems, but at the same time also create a lot of jobs. So I strongly believe and firmly believe that unless we disown ourselves from the notion that education will just naturally happen, because that's the outdated old industrial age. The way technology is developing and innovation is happening at a far rapid rate, much more faster than policymakers can adapt to, or even so educators. We have a challenge that unless we deal with this issue, and more so the private sector get involved in education more proactively, we are fooling ourselves, because every year we produce 1 million school leavers, and out of that million, about 800,000 of them become unemployed because the industry can only absorb, I'm talking about industry and university institutions of higher learning, can only absorb close to 300,000. And you have between 700,000 school leavers every year becoming unemployed. If you aggregate that times 10, 7 million. Now, if you propagate and you project that into the future without meaningful solutions, I'm not talking about wishful thinking and hope and desire, meaningful solutions, we are sitting in a time bomb and we don't know what we're dealing with. So we have to be more solution-driven and more proactive with our dissatisfaction with what the education system is producing, because this dichotomy of what the schooling system provides and what the market needs is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Your insights are really excellent indeed, and you make a very good point. I'm going to ask the other questioners to keep their questions or comments very succinct, as we are running out of time. Young lady.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity. My name is Sarah. I am the MD of Tepiso Branding Solutions. And speaking of being solutions orientated and impact, investing in impact-driven projects, I own a company that can manufacture sustainable fashion bags in terms of, there's alignment in terms of championing SDG 12 that speaks to responsible production and consumption. For example, if you look at this one, it says here, made in India. So I'm just, asking everybody in the room, is there any impact investors to invest into my business so that we can manufacture locally and brand locally and show that we are, proudly South African and we can contribute towards unemployment? So if there's any impact investors, let's stay in touch. Thank you.
Very good, very good. Yes, gentleman there.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you, ASI, as well. And I think just to hammer the point on youth being in the room, we appreciate the opportunity to hear industry players, political players discussing very key issues for the African continent at large. My question really is, adding to the entrepreneurial and academic challenge on the continent, how do we look at growing the youth opportunities for the continent in light of AI and what it promises in the sense of reducing the repetitive nature of things that usually is the entry point of employment for the youth, part one. And number two, how do we make it a net positive for the continent in the sense of the productivity that it brings for the continent at large, but also for employment and growth opportunities for the youth? That's my question.
That's an excellent question. And yes, you, sir.
Yeah. No, I think the gentleman preempted my question, but I'll structure it in a different way. I'm saying unemployment amongst youth is hovering around 40%. And with the, advances that are made in AI, I want to know from the three of you, how do you negotiate universal income? Because our institutions and the job market is not going to absorb the youth. So we should be obsessing about how do we introduce universal income, because a lot of jobs are going to be wiped out. It's an inevitability. But how do we make it equitable? How do we make it sustainable, whilst at the same time still nurturing, still keeping our eyes, to the stars, if I can put it that way. Thank you.
Oh, okay, great questions there. I'm going to just ask Daniel, perhaps you can just respond in 2 minutes to everything that you think is of interest, and for the rest of you as well.
I lost track of those very good questions. I mean, that's a week-long seminar in itself. The lady asking about the bag made in India, by the way, you remind me of that Make America Great Again cap that was made in China, I think the first batch. And it got a rather bad rap, as you can imagine. So, point well taken. And in fact, I was speaking to a big pharmaceutical conference a couple of years ago who make toothpaste. And I thought I'll do some research for my conference. And I went into Dischem and I looked at every toothpaste box in Dischem. And it's made everywhere but in South Africa. And I told my conferences, why can't you make toothpaste in South Africa? It's not such a high-tech product. And they weren't very upset with me because there were economies of scale and they made more of a profit if they brought this stuff in. Look, I think there's too much in terms of all of the questions. One of the things we miss from a general perspective, and you've got John who's talking this afternoon. I know John, and he lives in Dubai. And one of the successes of Dubai as as the UAE, let's say, as a country, has been to study the future. There's one thing about of understanding the past and making sure the past doesn't replicate itself. But there's another thing about getting ready and preparing for the future. And it's a thread that runs through all of the questions to me. And what they've certainly done in Dubai, as far as I know, is that they have I'm not advocating for even more cabinet ministers in South Africa, with apologies, Mr. President, here, but they have a ministry of the future, And wouldn't it be nice if we had a minister of the future here in South Africa? As I've said, much of what we do from a social redress point of view, and that relates to the question on equitable income and even a basic income grant, that is a reflection of where we've come from. But we need to grow this economy and we need to innovate this economy and open up that entire process. And I think in every single governmental department, a Ministry of the Future needs to assess those future paths and trajectories, relate them back to what the state can do, which I think we've heard is not as much as the state thinks it can do, and also see where the private sector can then inject the skills development and technology into that particular project. And I think that should be a given in any society, anywhere. Bring in the future to where we're going to be. We know the trends, we know the themes, we know AI. In the AI case, by the way, it's the last point I'm going to make on this. We've really got an advantage here on the continent if we know how to use AI properly, in that we can leapfrog the lack of skills, or leapfrog often the relatively weak education that so many of our kids get by virtue of the tuition that they can get through AI. But it's easy for me to say that. It's going to be translated into practical initiatives that take all of those hundreds of thousands of kids who do not finish their matric, their grade 12, and rechannel them through re-education with the benefits of AI. What a tremendous asset AI is for the re-education of kids who've missed out on a formal education. And that should be a critical element of our state educational department and the private educational institutions, at least in this country and in the rest of the continent. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Thongwane, very, very briefly, your responses. We're in a quandary. Time is against us.
Okay, you're asking too much of me.
I know.
But I must say about Ministry of the Future, telling Daniel I was a bit of a transhumanist, believing that man and machine should meld and we should upload our consciousness. These sorts of things are happening. We can travel interplanetary, so do put my name forward. Moving up that shameless plug, though. Talking about the youth dividend, I think one of the gentlemen actually spoke about the youth unemployment rate being at 40%. Actually, the structural youth unemployment rate is sitting at 60% in South Africa. One particular thing that we have done with SCS Space, as well as with the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation, as well as the current contract that we're consulting on with Denel, is to bring in a human capacity development perspective. And this human capacity development takes highly niche specialist skills and actually develops for the work that is required. So if you're looking at high-tech companies, what they're doing now, instead of looking for graduates in computer science, they are looking for people that are able to work on cloud architecture, particularly AWS, particularly Google, systems and database management. So they'll train that workforce for that. and are able then to employ people who have a full alignment with what's required in the economy with what's required in terms of skill. So we're doing that for satellite development. We're doing that for some of the broader niche digital and infrastructure products that are being developed. When it comes to speaking about artificial intelligence, well, the question is, what aspects are we still talking about? The level of advancement that AI has moved from is your large language models, then to your large data systems, further on to that in terms of agentic AI, which is moving ultimately to developing a system that would eventually be able to reason as far as possible as a human mind, right? So develop autonomy and sentience. And in the satellite environment, where the Holy Grail right now is developing autonomous systems, where satellites will be able to look at threat detection and then communicate with the Navy so that it could alert, our national security system and that level of autonomy. This is the simple ask: get yourself skilled. Get yourself skilled up. I myself, even though I was a bit of a techie, I did some development in Linux. I taught myself how to code in Python because that's what's used in astrophysics. So I do code a bit. And very recently, I've done a development course on the foundations of generative AI. So there's a demystification about what AI can do in terms of the loss of jobs, because if there's something AI cannot do right now, that it cannot replicate the petabytes. This is thousands of gigabytes of data that the human mind is able to just develop like that. So when you have this creativity, when you have this youth dividend, when you are developing very specifically for specific skills, vocational training, then we would be able really to upskill, educate, develop the type of economic and entrepreneurial environment which will really enable us to benefit from the youth dividend.
Andrew, I don't do this to you because you're the visitor, but you have 1 minute.
Thank you. Might be a lot in this digital age. But I guess you've heard the answers. And, one of the most impressive things I see today is in the digital world, in the AI environment, there's a huge opportunity. Talking of ministries, in Kenya, we have a Ministry of ICT and the digital economy. And why was that deemed important? Because when you look at the youth job market, we have exactly the same problem South Africa has. Not everybody is going to be absorbed into formal employment. So what do you have to do? You have to look at what's the other opportunity. And the truth of the matter is, today, what I see, especially with the youth, doing on this wonderful thing we call our internet and in that digital space, is everybody's delivering literally all their new business opportunities on the digital space. What do I mean? Musicians today, Jerusalem is not sold on a CD on the high street in Sandton. It's merely posted on YouTube. And guess what? Somebody in Kenya watching that YouTube video, as far as I'm concerned, it's a free watch. But every click on that video is revenue for the producers of that song. They've never met me. They've never performed in Kenya. They've never performed in London. They have customers across the globe. When you look at the opportunity in the digital space, I think of a young kid in Kenya forming a company called Wasili. Wasili is literally Uber in his parents' garage. And in a little town called Nakuru, Uber could not enter because they found he had occupied the space of digital ride-hailing services. That young man is doing very well today. Nobody ever employed him for a single day. So for that 60% of us who are not going to climb onto the employment ladder, look at AI and the digital economy as a huge opportunity. And again, I say, as far as the government is concerned, we have to lubricate and facilitate that opportunity in the best way we can, because that'll get a lot more of our youth onto the productive economic platforms that are available literally without even needing capital. The last thing we're also seeing that needs facilitation is digital credit availability. We're allowing digital credit entrepreneurs onto our platforms and licensing them. Today, in the Central Bank of Kenya, we have about 540 pending applications on the digital credit space and payment service provision. In fact, we're having to be very careful about how you license it, and we're working on updating our regulations in consultation with industry participants. So if you think about that opportunity and juxtapose, let's say something like Bitcoin, global phenomenon. Today in Bitcoin, you can do 7 transactions a second. On M-Pesa, you can do 3,000 transactions a second. Think about it.
Please, can we give it up for our panelists?